Late, I'm late. Welcome, people of Earth and elsewhere, to Spam Crackers finally gets around to talking in depth about the most recently animated portion of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Vento Aureo. 39 episodes sure went by quickly, and the weeks leading up to this review have gone by even quicker. Fair warning now, since the show has been finished for so long, I feel like there's enough wiggle room for me to just go into this thing full force and leave no rolling stone unturned in regards to spoilers. If you want a spoiler-free review, this won't be the video for you. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive into David Productions' latest installment of the JoJo animated universe. The first thing I have to get off my chest is a personal feeling and statement. I'm not going into this and gonna act like I can be perfectly unbiased concerning the newly coined Golden Wind arc of JoJo. Truth be told, when I first read the manga, I didn't understand half of what was going on, and I came to the conclusion that this was the least interesting part as of yet, with Giorno being the blandest and most disappointing JoJo to date. You see, while people like to refer to Part 4 when speaking of bad translations and duang memes, those translations carried over well into Part 5, where I was mostly exposed to them. Like so many other people across the sea from Japan, I had a rather negative first impression of this part because I wasn't able to fully grasp what was going on, and trying to understand King Crimson was too much on top of the continued duang. Luckily, now there are far better translations on the internet, but I never got around to rereading the series as I had intended to. Instead, I left my impressions up to fate. As it were, with certain parts of Diamond is Unbreakable, I trusted that my second time experiencing Part 5 could only be improved by the anime version, and went in hoping that David Productions would be able to improve my opinion of it. They have wholly succeeded. Like any other JoJo part before it, the production quality for Golden Wind is spectacular. From an animation and musical standpoint, it holds up well against its predecessors. The aesthetics of the show, while being distinctly JoJo in style, stand out from previous installments of the series, and this is in no small part affected by Araki's shifting drawing style and improvements in writing. The jump from the yellow skies and purple trees of Moriocho back into what can only be called more realistic color schemes for the Italian setting is almost as jarring as jumping into it. Nonetheless, the change doesn't leave any bad impressions, at least not to me or anyone that I've spoken to about it. It's only right that I mention how well I think David Production manages to incorporate its CG elements into the 2D projects that it works on, and of course this is no exception. I mean, just look at Aerosmith. In addition to this, the series manages to bring out the best of established Part 5 memes for anime-only experiencers and add even more new ones for older and newer fans alike to enjoy. It would only be appropriate to spotlight the absolutely outstanding job that is the transfer of the single half-page torture dance scene into a minute-long acid trip of a sequence that we should have seen coming, but went above and beyond total adaptation into something that can only be described as, quote, better in the anime, unquote. While on the subject of music and animation, Fighting Gold, the first opening sequence of the season, manages to distill these things into once again a brilliant JoJo OP that is both catchy and visually stimulating, with those subtle hints and nods to the manga that one would expect no less of from the series. I'm happy to say that Part 5 doesn't make the mistake of giving us too many openings per number of episodes it's run, something I can't say for the last season. Though, this seems to be compensated for in exchange for multiple ending sequences. My thoughts on this are a bit conflicted. It seems absolutely unnecessary to make more than one ending sequence per season or part, as we've seen previously, but you know what, I really couldn't stand Freakin' You by Jodachi, so, the change is more than welcome by me. That being said, is there some sort of irony in the fact that Modern Crusaders by Enigma was used here? You know, because Crusaders was in the title of Part 3 and Enigma was a stand featured in Part 4? It seems almost like the wrong choice, but thematically, the ending sequence itself makes up for that. Why couldn't we have had this the whole time, though? I mean, it's not as though the series makes any tonal shift by the time we get to this point. Also, we changed the visuals for the ending twice, and that rubbed me the wrong way because it, again, seems unnecessary, the same way that 3 openings just didn't seem necessary for Part 4. Continuing on, Uragiri Mono no Requiem is an okay opening. The song itself is pretty catchy, and the sequence changes up the formula for JoJo openings, where instead of making allusions to the parts of the story that have yet to be seen, it recaps what has happened up until this point. Is this change for better or for worse? I'll let you decide. Personally, I think there was a blatantly missed opportunity to foreshadow Polnareff's return, and my disappointment, while measurable, is not to be ignored. The use of King Crimson vs. Gold Experience Requiem to give not only one but 2 alternate opening sequences is about what can be expected when trying to live up to the expectations set by Sono Chi no Kyoku. It does have a sense of hype to it, but given the ridiculous powers at play in this particular part that are supposed to be applied to this opening, it has less of a dramatic flair and less impact than in other parts. Next, let's talk about the meat of the series, the plot and the characters. Of course, while all JoJo parts can be taken in stride as their own isolated stories, there are elements from an overarching universe that always seem to carry over. The saga of the Stone Arrow is in full swing as we are introduced to Giorno Giovanna and the Italian fashion mafia. While the stalwart manliness of the first 3 parts has been all but completely erased from the art style, Golden Wind makes up for it in pure nightmare fuel. Araki surely takes heavy inspiration for backstories and horror elements from established tales, but even knowing that doesn't make them any less terrifying. Once again, in essence of what JoJo is, being an anime and manga series that is incredibly influential, we are introduced to a host of characters who couldn't exist in a series other than this one. In terms of design, it seems impossible for any of these characters to be mistaken for any other anime character, no matter what style they are drawn in, and that's just one thing that makes Part 5 its own thing. The story we are told this season is one of this aspiring gangstar who wants to take over Passion, the most influential mafia outfit in Italy, to my knowledge, and his journey to that position under the bold and charismatic Bruno Bucciarati. Next to them are an up-to-standard group of quirky but competent young Joe Bros ready to throw down with the best of them. As it is, the design of the adventure that follows is no more or less complicated than a standard shonen series, with our protagonist having one goal in mind and the hoops he has to jump through in order to get there. Naturally, those hoops get more and more bizarre as this adventure continues, and as one following the escapades of the Joestar bloodline, I wouldn't expect anything less. In the long-term goal to figure out the identity of the mysterious head honcho of the outfit, the group is tasked with delivering his daughter to him, and in the winding path to do that, we encounter, of course, many enemy stand users. The attacks don't stop when the series makes its break from following the orders of the boss to straight up tracking him down and planning to get rid of him with no time to lay out a long con. We laugh, we cry, we make the most of the memes that come to us. Overall, the plot is solid in its own right. Of course, a series can't be carried solely by concept. A great story can be brought down by terrible characters, and there are some points in this particular part that suffer a bit from where characters are lacking. JoJo has a lot of characters that can hold their own in terms of how they affect the story and everyone else around them, but then, in this part, we have to factor in that Giorno is the resident JoJo, and is supposed to be the protagonist as the other JoJos before him. But he's not. Now, one might ask how the hell-spawned son of Dio's head on Jonathan Joestar's body could possibly be a weak character, but it's surprisingly easy to explain. As soon as the series has covered the basics of how this part is connected to the previous ones, all those things become irrelevant. Giorno is the lead character for all of 4 episodes where he decides to join the gang and is enlisted by Bucciarati to help take over Passion. All fine and good. We get to see Giorno's key characteristics. First, that he is a member of the Joestar bloodline through and through, giving him a solid sense of justice in spite of his circumstances, and second, that he also has been affected by those circumstances to the point that, in pursuit of justice, he is not above harming or even killing others. It is an intrinsic duality that you'd think would make this character fascinating to follow, and for those first 4 episodes it is, but then he joins the gang and following Giorno loses all relevance. As of episode 5, Bruno is now the lead. Once upon a time, I wondered aloud why it was that so many people seemed to like Bucciarati, and now I know the reason. It's because he's the main character of Part 5, not Giorno. While other JoJos are characterized by their ability to surround themselves with people by the inexplicable gravity that is protagonist syndrome and their personalities, for better or for worse, Giorno doesn't fill the void in this section of the Joestar saga. Bucciarati does. Bruno is the leader. The gang all center around him. Giorno centers around him. Everyone has an opinion and respect for the leader of their sect, and that's not Giorno. No one other than Abbacchio seems to have an opinion of Giorno as a person, and the rest of them simply bounce off of him the way that their personalities will allow them to. Our JoJo fits in just like the rest of them, and goes along with the leader like the rest of them. What exacerbates this problem is the fact that, with the rest of the gang being so much more interesting and having more fun personalities, Giorno looks like a blank canvas in comparison. Sure, you can say that Bruno trusts JoJo and he's an irreplaceable member of the team, but so what? Everyone served a purpose to get us to the end of this bizarre adventure. What is making Giorno stand out here? he really comes across as an accessory character, more of a support who swoops in with random knowledge and steals the final blow in every other character's fights. Is he important? Sure. I'm not saying that Giorno is useless, but with the colorful cast around him and Bruno being the effective protagonist to the point where even when he's dead, he's not really dead, Gio is an ineffective JoJo. Having to say that is a crying shame considering how well he is set up in these first few episodes. Alas, all we get is this exemplary 7-page muda muda muda, and the one time he says, "Ree!" Satisfying? Yes, these moments definitely were, but it doesn't make up for the lack of presence he has in the rest of the series. With that said, this part had a bit of a lackluster finale, and that is mostly related again to how the characters were used leading up to that point. One more point I had to make in terms of Bruno being unmistakably who's the leading man is the final fight with the boss. You see, that fight ends as soon as Bucciarati is the one who is permanently dead. Bruno dies, and then in the next 2 minutes, the arrow is used by Giorno to wrap everything up. It feels very anticlimactic. There was no solving the mystery of King Crimson and finding a way to counter it. There is an emphatic point put on the fact that this is not something you can actually do. The only way to solve the problem is to, of all things, get the arrow and power up a stand and bet on it being able to defeat him. That's exactly what happens. And it happens in a way that is not very satisfying. In every other part of JoJo, in every other fight even in this series, they're maintained this standard of having to outwit and outsource your opponent in order to defeat him. But at this juncture, Araki has written something so overpowered that he admits to having no way to do that with this final fight. It's left entirely up to who is chosen by fate and destiny and all that jazz. JoJo has pulled some unimpressive final blows before, let's not get it wrong, but there is just something about Gold Experience Requiem doing everything on its own to send Diavolo to his ultimate fate that doesn't feel right. Giorno doesn't even know what happened, fate just chose him. He didn't win because he was better or more interesting or cunning, he just won because fate chose him, and that's kind of underwhelming. Speaking of Diavolo's defeat, was this really necessary? Diavolo is an excellent villain. Taking a page from Kira in Part 4, we have another enigmatic force pulling the strings from behind the scene and causing all kinds of trouble for our crew here. As a character, there's not a part of him or his Yu-Gi-Oh! Style secret identity that is not interesting. From his backstory to his stand lag incarnate, the most is made of his screen time. None of it is wasted, and that is necessary for the story because he's not around a whole lot to leave those kinds of impressions lightly. In turn, it is made clear to us as the audience that as a leader of a mafia gang, and even beforehand, he is a cutthroat guy who will do anything to keep his power and never allow anyone to compromise it. The slaughter of Sorbet and Gelato, to the drug trade, trying to kill Trish and taking the lives of half of the rest of the gang, you know there are no lengths he won't go to for his end. Yet still, his end does not seem appropriate. Diavolo is relegated to a sequence of unending deaths, never to end, and never to be certain of how it is he dies, never to know his true fate, which should seem appropriate for someone who won't stop talking about fate choosing him, but it doesn't. Maybe his enigmatic persona and the lack of presence for the most of the first half takes away from the feeling that this is the kind of defeat he deserved, or maybe it is the rest of the encounter leading up to it that involves not so much physical confrontation or even a battle of wits so much as simply waiting for him to out himself to the rest of the gang who are trying to stop him. Either way, the constant deaths don't seem to tie up his story well. I don't think I can accurately describe it, but the entire finale is underwhelming. Giorno does not consciously deliver the final blow. No one knows what ultimately happened to the boss. Even when Bruno was dead, we're given the final episode and a half to remember him and literally everybody but Giorno, to the point that I think Fugo had more screen time. They don't tell us what became of Trish, and we end up where we should, that is with Giorno at the top of the gang, but that's by default. I can't say in good faith that this was a satisfactory way to end this part, but this is what we got, so that's just how it was going to have to be. In conclusion, Part 5 is still my own least favorite part of JoJo, and Giorno doesn't get any higher on my JoJo tier list. No matter how much the anime improved my opinion of both, don't get me wrong, it was much more enjoyable the second time. Before I finish off this review, I think I'm going to list off some of the less prominent pros and cons I found throughout watching the series, just things I did or didn't like. Despite the series having a great deal of horrific imagery, there was a surprising lack of censorship like black blobs and blurs in this part, and I appreciate that, even if it made Metallica a more graphic fight. Speaking of horrific imagery, I hate Giorno's pink color scheme and un-JoJo-like green eyes. I don't care if the almighty god of the Arakiverse chose those colors himself, I am not obliged to think that they look good and will retain that opinion. While almost all of my least favorite stands for various reasons are in this part, it can't be denied that the encounters and subsequent fights, such as with Notorious B.I.G., were the edge of your seat levels of great to watch. This part also has included some of the best presented stand introductions to date, including Purple Haze and Silver Chariot Requiem, just to name my favorites. Diavolo's reveal in the anime has changed from how it worked in the manga, and I must level my disappointment here for not going full Yu-Gi-Oh! With his transformation from Doppio to Diavolo. If for some reason I didn't like Narantia or Mista before, I can say now that I do. The entire gang is fabulous, even if Abakio is Squidward. I love the return of Polnareff, and I think that him becoming a turtle is just the kind of bizarre thing that makes JoJo deserving of its reputation. In terms of pacing, Part 5 made much better use of the 39 episodes it was given than Diamond is Unbreakable, but the lengths of the respective series probably has something to do with that. I can now say at least that I know the difference between King Crimson and Epitaph, and I might not have gone into much detail concerning individual fights or characters, but that doesn't mean that I don't like them. I appreciate how it is that Diavolo is the one who single-handedly kills half the cast and not anybody under him, because that makes his defeat as a villain that much more imperative. Still not that impressive, though. Purple Haze feedback OVA when? Probably never. There you have it. My conclusive thoughts on JoJo Part 5 as of its anime adaptation. It was a long time coming, but it is finished. Now we wait until Part 6 is announced! Ha 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 ha! On that note, David Production has other things to work on, and I think I'll keep watching Fire Force and looking forward to the alleged second season of Cells at Work in the meantime. I'd like to give a big thanks to everyone who has watched this video all the way through, and as always, feel free to leave a comment below and telling me how you feel about JoJo Part 5. Give suggestions for future videos or artistic endeavors, thumbs up the video if you liked it that much, and subscribe if you really want to know when I upload next. That'll be it for now, people of Earth and elsewhere. Hope to see you all in the next video, whenever that is. Ciao!